All right, folks, ladies and gentlemen, everyone, colleagues, comrades, welcome to the third in the series of 30-minute method sessions that we're having here at Ton Tang University in the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities. All focused on methods, obviously, and we're really lucky today to have a former undergrad student of mine from way, way back, although he hasn't aged at all, it seems, Dr. Jack Boulton. He's done his fieldwork in Namibia, fantastic book has just come out on that, and he's also the editor of a wonderful magazine that's been running 20 years as well, Jack, I think, or so.
Yeah.
It's called Stimulus Respond, and it's a great magazine. But I won't say too much because we've got to... We're quick, fast, and compact in these sessions. I'll hand over straight to Jack, who's going to talk on science fiction, the new literary turn, and anthropology. Jack.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, John. And it's also very nice to see you. It has been a long time, although we have been in touch over the years. So as John said, my name is Jack. I am an associate
Bên trước
research...
câu hỏi rồi, giờ này có người khác hỏi chứ.
Oh,
Rồi, tắt rồi.
am I still muted? No, I'm not muted. And I'm associate researcher at KU Leuven's Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology in Belgium. I'd like to thank you all for attending my seminar this afternoon, or the morning for me. It's now 10 o'clock in the morning. My doctoral fieldwork and my ongoing research concerns gender, specifically masculinity, and the urban landscape in Namibia. And I've worked in two Namibian cities, Swakopmund, which is one of the secondary cities, and Windhoek, which is the capital. So I will keep my presentation today quite short, as the main objective is for you to discuss the material that I will present, to reflect on some of the ideas shown, and then to come up with your own ideas. But I would like to discuss briefly a new literary turn in anthropology, which has started only over the past 10 years or so. It incorporates authors such as Elizabeth Povinelli and Anand Pandian. And you might be familiar with the old literary turn in about the mid-1980s, in which authors such as James Clifford suggested that we approach writing ethnography as we would do writing works of fiction. But this isn't very bad advice, but it's not especially what I mean today. The new literary turn suggests that we should draw inspiration from literary works, including books, TV, film, and other media types, in order to better understand the people that we work with, to ask new and interesting questions, and to incorporate broader understandings of possible futures, which of course have yet to happen. And the particular focus is on science fiction. So, of course, my examples are drawn mostly from Western TV and media. It's what I know best. I'm not massively familiar with Vietnamese sci-fi. However, I did do a little bit of research. And at the end, I would like you to think about media in Vietnam and possible examples from your own experience. There are a few examples that I've given listed on the slide. Maybe you've heard of them. I'm not sure. But fiction is a powerful tool which shouldn't be underestimated. In a Namibian context, Renzo Bass describes the ways that fiction was used by colonial forces to construct specific ideas about Namibia as an empty or wild space which needed taming, and therefore to justify the colonial project. And later still, fiction was used to construct specific narratives about colonization and apartheid and the struggle for independence. and what people desired for the future. Therefore, it also contributed to Namibia's independence. The process is described by Renzo Bas as fictioning space, the collapsing of fictional worlds into real ones so they become one and the same. And it's this latter point that the current literary term builds on. Fiction can serve as a resource for life in perilous circumstances, and it's meant to be an ongoing process of decolonization and an exploration of the imaginative worlds of individuals in real life, i.e., to leave research a little bit open, incorporating speculative futures and the desires for those futures. Anand Pandian, for example, takes inspiration from authors such as Ursula K. Le Guin. And for Le Guin, encounters with the future were encounters with other worlds, which are remarkably different from our own. The future will be nothing like the world as it is today, particularly when we're thinking in terms of thousands, millions, billions of years' time. In those kind of time frames, no one alive then will be meaningfully related to anybody who is alive now. But this is also one of the purposes of science fiction, to imagine what things might be like tomorrow or in a million years, and to remind us to take inspiration from different ontologies, moving in exciting new ways. And science fiction is, after all, a place for thought experiments and what ifs. And where ethnography and anthropology more generally can certainly be descriptive and diagnostic, science fiction operates in three idioms: extrapolation, intensification, and mutation. So we can take, for example, an institution which exists in the present day and imagine what life would be like in the future if that institution were never to change. Or we can think about things such as disasters, for example. What happens if we take something, I'm looking around myself for an example, we take mobile phones, for example, I happen to have one here. If we take the ideas incorporated into the phone and take them to their extreme kind of end points, what would life be like then? Science fiction can serve as a way for us to think about sometimes difficult topics. And in that sense, as much as anthropology is about documenting the way life is today, it should also incorporate the possibility of different futures. And for Ayaan Appadurai as well, the culture concept of anthropology has been predominantly past-gazing, with much less understanding of the ways that possible futures are equally embedded in the actions of the present. And we also need to remember, he says, that the future is not just a technical or neutral space, but it is also shot through with effect and sensation. And the future, as it exists in the present, through imagination, anticipation, and aspiration, is characterized both through the actions which possibly produce it, as well as the sensations that it creates. Excitement and joy, but also fear and pain. And social science has never been particularly good at catching these properties of human life, but it's never too late to improve. And although our conversation here started with literature of all kinds, the way to access this kind of data is through ethnographic fieldwork, and particularly long-term ethnographic fieldwork in which a detailed, full, and complete understanding of our research participants' life world is gained. And whilst science fiction can help us to imagine different worlds, it should also be grounded in reality. And it is science fiction, after all, not social science. But it does stress the need for qualitative data more than quantitative data, or data that cannot necessarily be quantified. So I said I would keep my talking very brief, and it's actually been a little bit quicker than I thought it was going to be, but that's all right. So I'd like to open up the seminar to make it more of a discussion, and I have a clip to show you. I'm not sure how I'm going to get to that clip. I'm sure John will help me if I need it.
Sure. I mean, we have to unshare this one, I think,
Okay.
and then
And I go to that one. Share screen. That one.
oops.
Turn off.
Now do the transcript.
I think it should be set. That's
Okay. Got no sound.
you've got that.
Not hearing any sound.
Why?
I don't know. Maybe this little, see on the right? Oh no, that's autoplay. Well, people have got the subtitles. But that's a shame. Live transcription, recording original sound on, I've got. Have you got in the top left-hand corner a thing about sound?
No.
John,
Yeah.
sorry, if you stop sharing and if you try when you share the video screen, there should be two boxes below where you need to tick so that the video sound is also shared to the Zoom audience.
Okay. So get out of share,
I stop share.
right? And then what Daisy has said, thanks Daisy for that. So when you share the video, you need to tick share on the sound too. So when you go to share screen,
Okay. Share screen. Is it
advanced?
Share sound and optimize for video clip?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it.
Thank you, Daisy.
Stuff. Well done, Daisy. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Okay. Let's try again.
Microfilm.
Is that working?
It's a complete record.
Yes.
Yes, history, architecture, literature, engineering. Incredible. By a body of human thought. What's it all for? Austerity? I don't know. Why build all this and send it into space?
I say, it couldn't be some sort of survival kit, could it?
Survival?
Yes, you know, the sort of thing they shove in lifeboats.
You're improving, Harry.
Am I really?
Yes, your mind is beginning to work. It's entirely due to my influence, of course. You mustn't take any credit. Now, what's missing?
Is it?
Yes. If we're to assume that some great cataclysm struck Earth, and that before the end they launched his lifeboat, then the one obvious missing element is man himself. What's happened to the human species, Harry?
I say, what a place for a mortuary.
Quite the reverse.
Reverse? I'd hardly call it a nursery.
Cryogenic chamber. Old principle, but I've never seen it applied on this scale. Look at them. There must be hundreds here.
Well, when you've seen one corpse, you've seen them all.
Corpse? These people aren't dead, Harry. They're asleep. The entire human race awaiting the trumpet blast.
Dead as a door knocker.
Homo sapiens. What an inventive, invincible species. It's only a few million years since they crawled up out of the mud and learned to walk. Puny, defenseless bipeds. They've survived flood, famine, and plague. They've survived cosmic wars and holocausts. Now, here they are, out among the stars, waiting to begin a new life, ready to outsit eternity. They're indomitable. Indomitable.
So I need to stop sharing again. And then I need to share again. F5. That's off. The sound of drilling is a very familiar international sound at the moment.
Yeah, I should have that off.
I've only got one slide left, so I'll finish off, like, I'm presuming everyone can see it, so I'll finish off and then stop sharing. But just to go back to the clip that I was talking about, and that's really the kind of thing that I'm talking about there, that nobody knows what will happen in the future. And the idea, for example, of a repository of all human knowledge in the far future invokes all kinds of different questions. Why did it happen? Who chooses the knowledge that is kept, and so forth. But we've only got 10 minutes left, it's good, so I'll turn the floor over to you. I'm going to ask 3 questions, in fact 4 questions. What for you is the most important science fiction work and why? What kinds of questions does that work invoke? Is it a popular, i.e. have a lot of people seen it, or if not, why not? And lastly, and most importantly, although you can take those 3 questions away with you, that's fine, but if anybody has any questions at all about this or anything else, then I'm happy to answer. So thank you very much for your time. I hope I wasn't talking too quickly that people could understand, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me, John.
Thank you, Jack. That's great. I think we can talk about those questions for sure. I mean, and others, sure. I guess I'll start. Battlestar Galactica. Every question there is, torture to imperialism to you name it. The robots have minds, and do they dream of electric sheep or God? And it's very popular. It was very popular. It's a shame it ended, and it's a shame Caprica, the prequel, was cancelled after a first season. But I'll open it to anyone who wants to talk about those questions in a minute. I just want to ask you one thing. You talked about sci-fi as thought experiments and allowing you to think about difficult topics. And I think that's really fantastic in the context of doing long-term ethnographic fieldwork, getting the people we work with to also enter into these thought experiments. because what I think sci-fi is really useful for, although it's also a problem, it's that it does allow us to confront really important issues that don't get much discussed, but it does so by putting them up in space. Like it's a God complex thing, whether it be racial miscegenation, right? Famously the first screen kiss between Uhuru and Kirk happened in Star Trek, and Martin Luther King came down to meet Gene Roddenberry. It was so important. Body modification, alien births, viruses, 12 monkeys or something like that. Imagining the end of the world but not being able to imagine the end of capitalism, that kind of discussion. And cannibalism in quite a few films recently, which strikes me as very paranoid. And what are we going to do after the apocalypse? We're going to end up eating each other. The 100, several films have been confronting this issue of cannibalism. So I wonder, why is it that we find it so difficult to talk about these kind of things without projecting them into space, off-world, basically?
That's a good question, which I don't necessarily know the answer to the question, but when I was doing my field work, these kind of films, for example, were good starting points to open up conversations with people, which then made it easier to just as a way in, rather than completely abstracting them out of life altogether. And in an environment such as Swakopmund, where there was it's a very racially tense environment, where people where the division between two different groups of people we're talking in terms also of separate development, apartheid, that kind of way of developing a country, but each group didn't really know very much about what was going on the other side of the fence. So firstly, what do you talk about when you don't know anything about your neighbours? And then once you've started talking about those issues, where do you take them? So in that kind of context, a science fiction movie was actually quite helpful for just in kind of breaking the ice. We do, and also to say, I do know something about these kind of topics. How do you feel about it? And then see where your participants go with that story. If that kind of loosely answers the question.
It does. It's good. It's like a discussion starter. You starter for 10,
right.
and that's useful. If people have seen the same films that you've seen, I guess, and increasingly that's the case. I think if I'd have been trying to do that when I first started field work in Calcutta, that wouldn't be the case. But now, because there's such a big sci-fi scene in India, I haven't seen the films that they will talk about. They'll bring up things and I go, really? Oh, and I'm writing down notes to go and watch, to keep up with the media literacy of the areas that we do work in, which is another aspect of this that I'm really fascinated with. That who was it? Remind me, who said we should draw inspiration from media, film, television? Because that's really refreshing to think that anthropologists now actually recognise that other people have TV, have media competence more than anthropologists. They were in denial for a long time, pretending that they didn't.
I've always associated that question with an author called Anand Pandya, who is American, but his heritage is not American. I don't remember exactly his background. his ethnic background, shall we say? But in many ways, it isn't so important actually. But that's who I associate this with.
Okay.
It was always interesting for me because of the kind of what's the word I'm looking for? That kind of difficulty between all kind of not aggressive. My words this morning are not working. The wariness that anthropologists have often held science fiction in appears to be kind of wearing off a little bit. It's still there, I think, but it is wearing off a little bit.
So my friend Pradeep Baxi has made a comment on the chat, and I don't know if Pradeep you have a question, but he says he hails from the ancient home of apartheid, South Asia, and I'd love to hear some commentary on that. Pradeep, if you're up for that. But if not, anyone else can. I should have said at the start, when we started the discussion, but anyone else can make a comment on the chat here, and if you want me to read them out, I will, or you can say that you want to ask a question, and you may. I'm really keen that some of the students that we talked about sci-fi with this morning in my class would ask some questions. Pradeep continues, I draw your attention to the Mahabharata, the great epic of India, that seems to be a kind of science fiction in its time with Star Wars-like weapons. It's true, yes, Arjun has a weapon that seems to be a planet destroyer. And of course, the fact that Krishna can basically show Arjun just by like touching something on his tongue and give him a vision of the whole universe is kind of sci-fi. That was one of the ways in which when I was talking with people in India that we were able to start discussions about religion without having to explicitly say, right now we're going to talk about Hinduism. It's like, what was going on with that? But yeah, it's quite useful.
As another example, actually, John, we were talking about one of my colleagues, Ketriam Pipe, who is still working in DR Congo, and they were researching, or as part of the research, they were talking about witchcraft and magic, and she had this kind of inclination or kind of feeling that that pointing, I should do it actually if I'm going to talk about it like that, but pointing was a way of bewitching somebody. And it wasn't until she started talking about Harry Potter that people started to open up about this idea of like wands and being able to direct magic by zapping people. Right? So again, it's another way of another form of icebreaker, but it also connects with the real world, because this idea of zapping was basically coming from that kind of fantasy film where witchcraft was being directed through wands and kind of abracadabra. So kind of the ways that media worlds influence real worlds is just as relevant as using it as a kind of an icebreaker to talk about harder issues, because people do take inspiration from these things, right?
Sure.
Where did the idea for the iPad come from? Was that not from Star Trek?
Perhaps, yeah. But I'm sure there are lots of other things. Well, Yeah, this is one of the things we discussed this morning in the class, and here it's something that's maybe a bit touchy as well, and I think maybe like the example of Harry Potter, the people that anthropologists talk to, at least I know this from being in Lusaka for a little while with Kari Sugashida, who was doing fieldwork there on people's views of magic and medicine. They had learnt to be quite careful with anthropologists and not tell them about their strange beliefs. And so finding other ways to get them to talk about that was interesting. And for us in the class today, we were discussing how, you know, the first law of robotics, Asimov, which basically is a bit of paranoia because, okay, the machines shouldn't harm humans. They should always protect, robots should always protect humans, right? But then the sensible thing for robots is to preemptively stop humans from hurting themselves. And it's interesting that Asimov starts to talk about that because that's at the same time as the US was building strategic hamlets. The British were building similar strategic hamlets to protect the Malaysians and later the Americans from Vietnam from hurting themselves by becoming communist. Sort of similar to be able to talk about things that are difficult or haven't been talked about much, using sci-fi puts these things on the table. We have a question from a couple of questions now from Treat. Good afternoon. I'm wondering, Jack, what do you think about the future of books or free writing in general when we are living in the world ruling by numbers and modern technologies, iPads, right? What the world will be like with Ray Bradbury described in Fahrenheit 451, where people are rushing towards advancements and convenience but neglecting free ideas and free will. And of course, Fahrenheit 451 has been recently translated into Tingget, as we can. Oh, I can't show it here because I've got a funny background. Translated into Tingget just recently, so I suspect people are reading that. Yeah, so there's that question, and I'll give you the other one while we're at it. It's Pradeep, practicing field anthropologist Iravati Karve had written a book on the Mahabharata titled Yuganta. Many anthropologists like Louis Dumont have worked on parts of South Asian societies, however, they seem to have missed the science fiction-like qualities of the Mahabharata, and Iravati Karve's study on it. I should send it to John for you. Yeah, please do, Pradeep, that'd be great. But first of all, let's take up this issue of what the future will look. What will be the future of writing when, my kids would prefer to spend hours and hours on watching Roblox gaming rather than even spend a few minutes reading a book.
Yeah, but we, as writers, and I do think anthropologists are as much writers as they are social scientists, we do have a kind of, I don't want to use the word duty, I don't like this word, but a kind of, we should make our books be as compelling as possible. I mean, is it possible to make a really insightful social science text which reads like a comic book, for example, which is another way of getting people to read? There are many different experiments with formats that have been done and have still to be done. But no, I mean, getting people to read books is it's becoming more and more elitist, I think. The ability to read will eventually be limited to a few specialist people. It will be a specialist skill, I think, reading. And it shouldn't be like that, right? But having seen that kind of idea in the future, it's also important to challenge it as we move forward, I think.
I am myself waiting, Jack, for the day when, like Keanu Reeves, you can just like inject the book into your into the cerebral cortex and suddenly know kung fu, because I do have a lot of books I want to get through. But maybe the app for having that automatic transmission can also come with the memory of having enjoyed the pleasure of the text as well. But who's to say? On experiments, obviously Joe Sacco's stuff on Palestine was really important for the comic books. But there's another guy in India, Pradeep, talking about this reminds me. It's Shiv Viswanathan, who talks about writing social science fiction, and there's a few others that I would put in this camp of fiction, social science fiction writing. Michael Tausig will be one, but also a guest of our conference 2 years ago, Stephen Muki, who wrote about the Phantom, you know, the cartoon comic book character, the Phantom, but he went to the Andamans, which was where the Phantom's, the ghost who walks, right, where his lair is, on a tour and with his kid, and it was a kind of way to get his kid to read, I suppose, to read the Phantom comics, but also a vehicle for doing an ethnography. It was a great book. It's called Joe and the Andamans, and I do have that here as well, but I won't keep on showing books on the screen.
So put that in the chat box, John.
Sorry?
I'll type that.
Yeah, I'll name that in the chat. Joe, first of all, Shiv Viswanathan. So if anyone else has got a question. Yeah. And Muki calls this writing something else. What's it called? Critical fictioning or something like that. I don't know if you've come across his work.
No.
Yeah, he spoke at our conference last 2 years ago in 2019, the ISSH Innovations in Social Science and Humanities Conference, which we're doing again next December. I hope everyone knows. So, how much of a turn is this new literary turn, right? Anthropologists sort of have got into the habit of finding a new turn every few years. How many people are on the wagon, so to speak, on the bandwagon, not on the wagon? That's a different metaphor.
Bandwagon. Well, it seems to have. Firstly, it seems to be quite an American concept. It also appears to be coming out of kind of like non-heteronormative spaces, let me put it like that. But it seems, I mean, it's caught on in Belgium, right? But that's not saying very much. I don't think it's necessarily a huge turn, but I also think that it's always kind of been there, actually. And in many ways, it's kind of reinvigorating ideas from the old literary turn, even if it also turns them on its head a little bit as well. So we'll see. But I also think it's very much in its gestation period. So.
Okay, we have a comment from Seeker since 1980. So I guess that dates you a bit. I was watching the very Hollywood-style Firefly TV series and reading. It's Sarov. Hi, Sarov. And reading Stars in My Pocket Like Grains of Sand. I don't know who the author is. Sarov, do you want to speak this out, or I can read it? Simultaneously.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, go on.
Should I?
Please do.
So I was just watching the very Hollywood Firefly, very Hollywood style Fireflies TV series, and there's a movie also where it's just the basic Hollywood storyline, not even the basic Hollywood sci-fi storyline, just taken in an innovative setting, that the Western and with just bits of novelties thrown in because they are set in different planets and all that. But it's just like a Western, like a space Western, and like that. And I was reading uh, Samuel R. Delany's Stars in My Pocket Like Grains of Sand, where he's just by being very elliptical, he just pushes the boundaries of what aliens can be like, or what alien civilizations can be like, without kind of charting it out in detail, but just kind of giving suggestions, or alien sexualities can be like. So so like much of Hollywood is a lot of just like reproducing these very basic cliche narratives. And so I was just thinking of the contrast. That's it. It's just a comment, not a question. So if Jack has something to share, like different genres of sci-fi.
I'm not entirely sure what to say other than I agree with you. But even something which has been as influential or as popular as, say, Star Wars is very much a cliche. And there's actually a really interesting criticism. I'll find it now whilst I'm just going to stop sharing so I can use my browser. But there's one criticism of Star Wars, which is kind of saying that it's exactly an example of the former idea that you gave, Saurav, where it is basically quite a cliche narrative, but it's presented as being something which is groundbreaking, but it isn't really. It's just done very well, shall we say. What was it? TARDIS.
It's true that Star Wars is cliche, right? Jabba the Hutt as the flaming despot and so on. But we were talking in the class today even that popular culture in the future, if you take Star Wars as an example, is really boring. Mostly they do car racing, swap meets of different mechanical bits. Basically they have markets full of obsolete technology and droids that they're trying to swap. Or they have jazz bands, right? Funny jazz bands playing clarinet, the kind of 50s jazz that obviously George Lucas was into, but not much else. Popular culture doesn't seem to have evolved beyond 1950s America. It's no wonder the majority of aliens that visit this planet visit the United States. As I don't know if you saw the meme that was going around on the web recently, they marked where all the majority of sightings of UFOs in the world have happened on the east coast of America, and the majority in America. A few in Australia, a few in India, but basically mostly aliens like to go to America because they're into 50s culture. It seems their future is not very interesting. It's the Jetsons, but that's about it.
It's also very reassuring for people, there's something very reassuring for people about the maintenance of the status quo, and that things in a million years' time will be pretty much as they are now, but with jetpacks. Right. There's
What were you
I
looking
don't
at?
know, even the idea that science fiction would invoke these kind of thoughts and these kind of ideas in people, even if it's a kind of anti-thought, a negative dialectic with science fiction, it's still important to do it, right? So we have something to thank Star Wars for, even if it's not as revolutionary as it would like to be.
Yeah, and yet it's reassuring. I was thinking that sociologists might feel a bit uncomfortable with the idea of predicting the future or focusing on future predictions, given so much of their work is, you know, what's going on now and so on. So how might we talk about that in a way that makes people more interested to not just see talking about sci-fi as a way to get informants to give you feedback or to comment, but actually as a analytical and critical framework.
That is a question I'm not entirely sure that I had the answer for, actually. But there are, I'm going to speak about at the conference in December, there are other programs, for example, such as The Prisoner, which are kind of designed to invoke a more kind of reflexive idea of your own involvement in the livelihoods of your participants, even in a very abstract form. So there are lots of different ways to go about it, but how do you differentiate on that side of the world between anthropology and sociology? What is the biggest difference? Because it's something that we still struggle with a little bit over here, and the difference is actually very hard to nail down, I think.
Yeah, it's obviously there's blending of boundaries between the two, but anthropology really only got official recognition, I think, 2009 or something. So there are a few departments, but there's a lot more departments planned of anthropology, whereas sociology is a little bit older, 25 years old, and social science from much earlier. That was, I guess, a bit more influenced by older paradigms, Soviets and so on, East Germany or other comradely affiliations. But our sociology is pretty well established, although a lot of it is a lot of work people do is survey and questionnaire and statistical packages. I've edited a lot of those recently in the papers for the conference. I'm getting better at it, but whereas anthropologists hardly ever touch surveys, right? Because Malinowski said, you know, whatever Malinowski said about them, you make up the answers and then you ask the questions to get the answers. I don't know whether it was Malinowski that said that, but that's sort of the biggest difference, I guess. And ethnography, the amount of time that anthropologists will spend doing their research on a site is vastly different. Although lots of anthropologists, we now have fly-by-night anthropology, right, where anthropologists parachute in as a consultant, say their piece and then leave, right? So yeah, I think that's a debate that still is also needs to be had here, and maybe in the future there's ways to get sci-fi to allow us to talk about that more explicitly. Thinking about the recent film or TV series Foundation, where a scientist's statistical method basically is the whole arc of the story. I don't know if you anyone saw the recent 10-part first series of Asimov's Foundation?
Not yet.
Yeah, it's quite good. It's very sleek, but and it is fairly well honest to the book. I think in not as explicitly as June or something like that, but it's quite good. Another question I've got, since we've not got any, and maybe we'll only take a few more minutes of people's time because we're getting up, is look, something I said earlier, and we talked about it before as well. Quite a lot of TV series recently, I'm thinking mainly of the 100, but deal with what will happen after the apocalypse, and won't we have to eat each other? Won't cannibalism be a thing? Why do you think that's just recently, it seems. I mean, there's Soylent Green from long, long ago, but that was a standout. That was an outlier. Why is it that quite a few TV series recently have included having to feast on the human? Anthropophagy, we call it. Is that right?
I think so, yeah.
What is it about our current period? I mean, surely there should be more sci-fi series about viruses and pandemics. That would be the topical thing. But it's almost like, no, we're going to have to learn to eat each other after there'll be roaming bands. I can't think of what the others are, but in 100, certainly they had to eat each other to survive. I guess 12 Monkeys, that series went into that for one section.
But there has to be a parallel there somewhere between the current state of, for example, capitalism as eating itself and basically eating human beings in order to survive, and this kind of rise in cannibalism and also zombie movies as well. The resurgence in zombie movies since about 2005, for example.
And so
But
what are
there's a lot
we
of
going
death.
to eat in the future? What are we going to eat in the future? You know?
Each other, presumably,
Daisy, I'm
or
thinking
each
of you.
other's brains.
I'm thinking of Daisy, Tam, your
Brain.
So,
I know. I mean, so,
Just
yeah.
sorry, Daisy. Go on. I'm interrupting. Go on.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I just think, based on the questions that you had, like, honestly, all my list of sci-fi films had to do with, imagination, inspiration of what we're going to use to feed the growing population, from Soylent Green, which is my number one, to more recent, like sort of Snowpiercer, or Brazil, Fifth Element. In each of these sci-fi films, I always look into, like, what is it that they eat, like, how do they sustain themselves, and what is the imagination of that. But I suppose, the kind of question that I had in mind was also that, in the way that you talked about how sci-fi is abstraction, intensification, and then, the third one is
Mutation.
Mutation, correct.
Mm.
And in that kind of approach of this turn towards sci-fi to look at alternatives and possible alternatives, it seems that we still can't really go beyond the fights that we have of we look at resources. It's always about limited resources and scarcity, and then and how can we go beyond that? It's to create artificially environments in which that does not exist, such as the Brazilian TV series 3%. So they created this, a world without scarcity, essentially, but based on competition, based on merit, what they call merit. And so that's their iteration of how we could and should or find an alternative way of sharing resources, or and it seems like, apart from the very mainstream Hollywoodian iterations of colonization or domination, any alternative seems still sci-fi is wonderful for all these inspiration from technology and what it looks like and stuff, but it seems we're so limited in how we imagine other ways of being together. Just some thoughts. I mean, of course, food is a resource, and that's always what I'm interested in. But just wondered if anyone had any thoughts about, like, good sci-fi that explores alternative ways of being together.
It's funny actually what you say about resources, and you're right. Having said that, when I was doing my field work in Swakopmund, I was working in the context of uranium mining, and working in as a uranium miner, actually digging the uranium out of the ground, is obviously a very dangerous job. It's paid fairly well for most people, but not everybody. But it always was promoted as a way to create a better life for yourself. And my question always was, or rather towards the end especially, it was, well, but what happens when everybody has this better life? Who will then dig the uranium out of the ground if, right? If everyone has everything that they need, no one will do this job. So in order to keep people wanting to do this dangerous job, there always has to be somebody who wants to better themselves. So in that sense, the kind of science fiction ideas of scarcity and also of sharing and of enough resources for everybody to have what they want was helpful for me to kind of challenge a dominant paradigm whereby people were kind of being sold this idea of dangerous work in order to better themselves, but actually the only people it was helping were the people who were consuming the uranium, usually in the West and increasingly in China, for example. And that kind of maintenance of a global status quo, which was dependent on the maintenance of a local inequality. And I never would have got as far as that in my thinking without those kind of science fiction ideas to help me get to that kind of scale. So
Nice. Yeah, we'll come to an end in a minute. I just want to read out a couple of things that have come up. And I think this is one good thing, thinking about who are the workers that do the keep the mines going. In Battlestar Galactica, there's an episode about that as well. It's the working class, or if not the robots. Quite often the robots become the working class, right? So Pradeep raises an interesting comment, anyway, of where is our discussion of Soviet science fiction. There are, Pradeep, studies of Soviet science fiction. I want to say Steve Shapiro has done work on that. I'll have to look that up, though. Ennui, Red Mars, so many. And then Sarov adds there's also post-apocalyptic porn short films. A notice for that just came in. And I'm immediately thought of, yes, Barbarella and all the sexy sci-fi. The utopia future that's a bit sexy is always very clean, though, and clinical and never moist. It's always even the actually the doctor and his offsider, they're always more than good friends, aren't they? It's very clean, that future there, and they're in a spaceship that's obviously got no cleaners. I don't see any robot cleaners, but he's dragging his long scarf around on the floor. I mean, his was a natty dresser for the 1970s, that doctor. His scarf is going to be really grungy if he's in any of the sci-fi futures like we get, where Blade Runner, for example, where the bottom layer of the working class are mostly Asian, actually, eating wok-based food, Daisy, and living in sort of neon Ginza or somewhere like that, a kind of urban apocalypse. Anyway, yeah, there's a discussion of Soviet film, Soviet sci-fi, a file of that where there's lots of interesting stuff. And I guess there's probably studies of sci-fi porn that ought to be looked at. If anyone else has got a question, last chance. Because we are short and sweet and brief here, we'll bring it to an end then. Thank you for those who put up questions or spoke, but most of all, thank you, Jack, for a great starter talk. Unfortunately, this is the last one of this series, but we have talked about doing it maybe with another university in the new year. So there, look out for more. If you're visiting us, look out for the ISSH 2021 conference, which is coming up on the 17th and 18th of December. You'll see a couple of us have got that background, and you can get that background too. I can send it to you. I think the program will be up in a couple of days on that website, issh2021.tdtu.edu.vn, and you can also register to attend, and you can hear people like Daisy Tam and Jack Boulton and many others, Peter Hudis, Marcelo Marco Marcelo, Nikos Papastergiadis, Scott Maguire, huge. Ishita Banerjee on food, about more than 70 speakers. So it's going to be great. That's on 17th and 18th of December. Jack, we can't applaud in a room, but you know, everybody's got their sound off. Thank you very much for gracing us with your presence. Good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
And enjoy the rest of your stay in Barcelona.
I want to make one last point before I go, because if I don't say it, I'm just going to regret not saying it. But I think one of the most important points to take away, I think, is that you can learn more about someone over a cup of coffee and an informal chat than any questionnaire or any survey will ever tell you. And you know, if that cup of coffee happens to be in front of a science fiction film of whatever genre, or a good one or a bad one, then even better. But still, qualitative research and informal qualitative research is, in my eyes, a lot more important than the formalized quantitative work. And that's all I want to say. But thank you very much for having me, and I hope it was a useful seminar.
Thank you, Jack. Okay.
All right.